The evening rush had just begun at the small roadside diner. Outside, the sky was turning orange as the sun slowly dipped behind the buildings. Cars rushed past on the busy road, their headlights flashing like tiny stars. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the smell of grilled meat, fried potatoes, and strong coffee. Plates clattered. Chairs scraped the floor. Customers talked loudly over one another. "Where's my order?" a man at the corner table complained. "I've been waiting 20 minutes, another voice shouted from the counter. The diner was full. Workers from nearby offices, tired drivers, and groups of friends crowded the tables. Everyone seemed impatient. Everyone wanted their food faster. But no one noticed the quiet pain standing in the middle of the room. A young waitress moved carefully between the tables, carrying a tray filled with drinks. Her name tag read Lena. She looked like she was barely in her early 20s. At first glance, she seemed like any other waitress rushing through a busy shift. But if someone looked closely, they would notice something else. Tears. They rolled slowly down Lena's cheeks as she walked from one table to another. She tried to wipe them away quickly with the back of her hand, hoping no one would notice. But the tears kept coming. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed glasses on a table. "Here's your iced tea," she whispered softly. The customers barely looked at her. One man glanced up and noticed her red eyes. For a moment, his expression changed as if he was about to say something. But then he simply looked back at his phone. Another woman across the room saw Lena wiping her face. She frowned for a second, then turned back to her conversation. No one wanted to get involved. At that moment, the diner's manager stormed out from behind the counter. He was a tall, heavy man with a sharp voice that could cut through any noise. "Lena," he barked loudly. The entire diner grew slightly quieter. Lena froze. The tray in her hands shook as she slowly turned toward him. "Yes, sir," she said softly. The manager crossed his arms and glared at her. "What's wrong with you today?" he snapped. "You're moving like a snail." Several customers looked up, curious now. Lena lowered her head, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't serve customers," the manager continued harshly. "Table 7 has been waiting forever. And look at you, crying during work." A few people at nearby tables exchanged uncomfortable looks. But still, no one said anything. Lena tried to wipe her tears again. "I'm really trying," she said quietly. But the manager just shook his head in frustration. "If you can't handle the job, you can leave. I've got 10 other people waiting to take your place." The words hit her like a heavy weight. For a moment, Lena stood there completely still. Her chest tightened. Her eyes burned. She wanted to explain. She wanted to tell someone what had happened earlier that day. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, she simply nodded and hurried away toward the next table, forcing herself to keep working. The noise inside the diner returned to normal. Forks scraped plates. People laughed and talked. And Lena kept moving, carrying drinks, taking orders, pretending everything was fine. But the tears never stopped. Across the room, near the window, a man sat alone at a small table. Unlike the others, he wasn't dressed in office clothes or neat shirts. His boots were worn and covered with dried cement dust. His shirt was faded and stained with sweat from a long day of work. A construction helmet rested on the chair beside him. He looked tired. His hands were rough and scratched from hard labor. Most customers barely glanced at him. To them, he was just another poor worker grabbing a cheap dinner after work. But his eyes were different. They were quiet, observant, and they were fixed on Lena. He had noticed her tears the moment he walked in. He had heard every harsh word the manager said. For several minutes, he simply sat there in silence, watching her struggle to keep going, watching her try to smile for customers while wiping tears from her face. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him. Finally, the man slowly pushed his chair back. The legs scraped softly against the floor. A few nearby customers glanced over. The dusty construction worker stood up. Then, without saying a word, he began walking toward the crying waitress. And suddenly, people started watching. The moment the construction worker stood up, a few people in the diner turned their heads. He didn't look important. In fact, he looked like the kind of man people usually ignored. His boots were old and worn, The leather cracked from years of hard work. Dust from a construction site still clung to them. His shirt was faded and stained, and the sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong but rough hands covered with small cuts and dried cement. His face looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from lifting heavy things all day under the hot sun. His eyes were slightly red, but they were calm and thoughtful. As he walked slowly toward the center of the diner, whispers began to spread between the tables. A man sitting near the counter leaned closer to his friend. "Look at that guy," he muttered quietly. "He looks like he just walked off a construction site." His friend chuckled under his breath. "Probably going to complain that his food is cold," he said. At another table, a woman glanced at the worker and wrinkled her nose slightly. "He shouldn't be making a scene," she whispered. People were watching now, not because they cared about the crying waitress, but because they were curious about the poor man walking toward her. Meanwhile, Lena had just placed another plate of food on a table when she noticed someone approaching. Her heart immediately tightened. For a second, she thought it was the manager coming to scold her again. She quickly wiped her eyes and turned around. But when she looked up, she saw the construction worker standing there. He stopped a few feet away from her. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He simply looked at her face, noticing the tears she was trying so hard to hide. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and gentle. "Are you okay?" The question was simple, but it caught Lena completely off guard. Her shoulders stiffened. She quickly lowered her head. I'm sorry if the service was slow," she said nervously. "I'll bring your order right away." Her voice trembled. The worker shook his head slowly. "That's not what I asked," he said quietly. Lena hesitated. She didn't know what to say. For hours, no one had asked if she was okay. They had complained about food. They had shouted about waiting. But no one had asked about her. The construction worker spoke again, his voice soft but sincere. "You look like you've had a hard day." Lena's throat tightened. She tried to answer, but the words felt heavy inside her chest. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice clearly said otherwise. The worker studied her face for a moment. Not in a rude way, just with quiet understanding. "You don't have to pretend," he said gently. Something about his words made Lena's eyes fill with tears again. She quickly looked down, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she murmured. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the worker gave a small, understanding nod. "Sometimes people are cruel," he said quietly. Those words made Lena freeze. It was almost as if he somehow knew. Her fingers tightened around the tray she was holding. Earlier that day, the memory still burned inside her mind. The angry voice of the wealthy customer, the expensive suit, the spilled coffee, the humiliation, the way everyone had watched while she stood there apologizing again and again. Her chest felt tight just thinking about it. Before she could say anything, a loud voice suddenly cut through the air. "Hey!" It was the manager again. He walked quickly toward them, his face filled with irritation. "What's going on here?" he demanded. His eyes moved from Lena to the construction worker. Then he frowned. "This isn't a place to socialize," he said sharply. "If you got a problem with your food, you can tell me." The worker turned toward him calmly. "There's no problem with the food," he replied. "Then mind your own business," the manager snapped. "She's here to work." Several customers nearby began whispering again. One man smirked. "Looks like the construction guy is trying to play hero," he joked quietly. A couple at another table laughed softly. "Yeah," the woman said. "What's he going to do? Fix her problems with a hammer?" A few people chuckled, but the construction worker didn't react. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out some folded bills. Without saying anything, he walked back to his table. The room grew quieter as people watched him. He placed the money under the plate where he had finished his meal. Then he paused for a moment. Lena walked over to collect the plate, expecting maybe a small tip or maybe nothing at all. But when she lifted the plate, her eyes widened. There was far more money there than she expected. It wasn't just a tip. It was enough to cover several meals. Her breath caught in her throat. She quickly looked up. The construction worker was already walking toward the exit. But just before reaching the door, he stopped. He turned back and looked at Lena one last time. Then he said something quietly, something simple. But the words made Lena's eyes suddenly fill with tears again. And this time, They weren't tears of pain. For a few seconds after the construction worker walked out, Lena stood completely still. The diner was still loud. Plates clattered. Customers talked. Someone laughed loudly near the counter. But for Lena, the noise faded into the background. Her eyes remained fixed on the door where the worker had just disappeared. His words echoed quietly in her mind. Not everyone in this world is cruel. She slowly looked down at the money resting in her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly. The tip was much bigger than anything she had ever received before. For a moment, she felt confused. Why would a stranger do something like that? Why would someone who looked like he barely had enough for himself give so much? Her chest tightened again. But this time, the feeling was different. It wasn't only sadness. It was something warmer. Something she hadn't felt all day. Kindness. As she stood there, her mind slowly drifted back to the moment that had broken her earlier that day. The memory came back like a painful storm. Earlier that afternoon, the diner had been busy even then. Sunlight poured through the front windows, lighting up the tables and chairs. Lena had been rushing between customers, trying her best to keep everyone happy. At one of the tables sat a man wearing a dark, expensive suit. His watch looked like it cost more than Lena earned in several months. His shoes were polished so brightly that they almost reflected the lights above. He looked important, and from the moment he walked in, he had been impatient. "Waitress," he snapped sharply when Lena approached. "Yes, sir," she asked politely. He ordered quickly without even looking up from his phone. "Black coffee." "Huh." Lena nodded and hurried to the counter. A few minutes later, she carefully carried the cup back to his table. But just as she reached him, something unexpected happened. A man walking past accidentally bumped into Lena's arm. The tray tilted, the coffee cup slipped, and before she could stop it, the drink spilled. Dark liquid splashed onto the businessman's expensive suit. For a second, the entire diner went silent. Then a man jumped to his feet in anger. "What did you just do?" he shouted. Lena's face instantly turned pale. I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "Someone bumped into me." "I don't care," the man snapped. He looked down at the coffee stains spreading across his jacket. "This suit costs more than you probably make in a year." People at nearby tables turned to watch. Lena felt dozens of eyes staring at her. Her heart pounded. "I'm really sorry, sir," she repeated. The businessman's face twisted with anger. "Sorry doesn't fix this," he said coldly. At that moment, the manager rushed over. "What's going on here?" he asked quickly. The businessman pointed angrily at Lena. "Your employee just ruined my suit." The manager's expression changed immediately. He turned toward Lena with a hard glare. "What did you do?" he demanded. Lena tried to explain. "It wasn't my fault. Someone bumped." But the manager raised his hand to stop her. "Apologize," he said firmly. Lena felt her throat tighten. "But now," the manager ordered. Tears began forming in her eyes as she lowered her head. "I'm very sorry, sir," she whispered. The businessman crossed his arms. "You should be," he said coldly. Then he leaned closer, his voice full of warning. "If this isn't handled properly, I'll make sure this place hears about it. And you," he pointed at Lena, "will be the first one fired." Those words felt like a knife to her heart. Her job wasn't just a job. It was the only thing keeping her small family afloat. Her mother had been sick for months. Medical bills were piling up, and her younger brother still needed school supplies, food, and clothes. Without this job, they would have nothing. So Lena kept apologizing, again and again and again, while the customers watched, while the businessman complained, while the manager stood beside him. That humiliation had stayed with her the entire day. Back to the present. The memories slowly faded as Lena blinked and returned to the noisy diner. Her eyes were still wet, but when she looked down at the money in her hand again, something inside her shifted. For the first time all day, someone had treated her like a human being, not like a problem, not like a mistake, but like a person who was hurting. She carefully folded the money and placed it in her apron pocket. A small breath escaped her lips. Maybe the world wasn't as cold as it had felt a few hours ago. But just as she turned to continue working, the manager suddenly appeared beside her again. His eyes were narrow with suspicion. "What's that?" he asked sharply. Lena hesitated. Just a tip, she said quietly. The manager held out his hand. Let me see. Reluctantly, she handed him the money. His eyebrows shot up when he saw the amount. Well, he muttered sarcastically. He looked toward the door where the construction worker had left. That dusty worker left this. Lena nodded softly. The manager snorted. Must be trying to show off, he said with a smirk. Or maybe he felt sorry for you. A couple of nearby customers chuckled quietly. Lena didn't respond. She simply took the money back and placed it carefully in her apron again. But inside her heart, something small had changed. The weight of the day no longer felt quite as heavy. The construction worker's kindness had given her a tiny spark of hope. Then suddenly, a loud rumbling sound echoed from outside. At first, it was faint. Then it grew louder. Engines. Several of them. The noise was powerful enough to make some customers turn their heads toward the windows. A moment later, bright headlights flashed across the diner walls. Someone near the door stood up to look outside. What in the world? He murmured. Another customer walked to the window. Then another. Curiosity spread quickly through the room. Lena slowly turned her head as well. Outside, multiple large vehicles had just pulled into the parking lot, and the sound of their engines filled the air. The rumbling sound outside the diner grew louder and louder. At first, most people thought it was just traffic passing by on the busy road. But within seconds, the deep roar of engines became impossible to ignore. Headlights flashed across the large front windows. One customer near the entrance stood up and leaned toward the glass. What's going on out there? He muttered. Another man quickly followed him to the window. Then another. Within moments, several people inside the diner were standing, trying to get a better view of the parking lot. Outside, 5 large black SUVs slowly rolled into the diner's parking area. Their engines hummed powerfully as they came to a smooth stop. The vehicles looked expensive, clean, polished. They were the kind of cars people usually saw outside luxury hotels or government buildings, not in front of a small roadside diner. Inside the restaurant, whispers began spreading quickly. Who could that be? A woman asked quietly. Maybe a celebrity, someone guessed. Or some rich businessman, another voice said. Even the loud conversations around the diner slowly faded. Curiosity had taken over the room. Lena stood near the counter, watching the strange scene through the window. Her heart was still heavy from earlier, but now confusion filled her mind. Why would 5 luxury SUVs come to a place like this? Then the doors of the vehicles opened. One by one, several men stepped out. They were tall and serious-looking. Each one wore a dark suit and polished shoes. Small radios clipped to their jackets. Their movements were sharp and professional. Security guards. The moment people inside the diner noticed them, the whispers grew louder. Those are bodyguards, someone murmured. This must be someone really important, another voice said. The guards quickly looked around the parking lot, scanning the area carefully, as if searching for someone. Then one of them pointed toward the diner entrance. Within seconds, 2 of the guards began walking toward the door. The glass door opened with a soft chime as they stepped inside. The effect was immediate. The diner fell almost completely silent. Forks paused in midair. Conversations stopped. Even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the counter. The guards looked around the room calmly, but seriously. Their eyes scanned each table, each customer, each corner of the diner. The manager quickly walked forward, forcing a polite smile onto his face. "Good evening," he said nervously. "Can I help you?" The tallest guard stepped closer. His voice was calm but firm. "We're looking for someone." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course." "Who?" The guard glanced around the diner once more before answering. "A construction worker," he said. The word surprised everyone. A construction worker?" the manager repeated. The guard nodded. "He was just here a few minutes ago." A wave of confusion moved through the restaurant. Customers looked at each other, puzzled. Why would men like these be looking for a construction worker? The manager scratched his head awkwardly. I think there was a guy like that here earlier," he said slowly. "Dusty clothes, work boots?" "Yes," the guard replied immediately. "That's him." Lena's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Her eyes widened slightly. They were talking about him. The quiet man who had sat alone. The one who had asked if she was okay. The one who had left the generous tip. The guard continued speaking. Where did he go? The manager pointed toward the door. He left maybe 5 minutes ago, he said. The guard's expression tightened slightly. Which direction? I'm not sure, the manager admitted. Several customers who had been whispering earlier now looked uncomfortable. One man who had mocked the construction worker earlier slowly looked down at his plate. The woman who had laughed quietly shifted in her seat. Suddenly, the memory of their earlier jokes didn't feel so funny anymore. If powerful men in expensive suits were searching for that worker, then maybe he wasn't just some poor laborer after all. Near the counter, Lena felt a strange mix of emotions. Confusion, curiosity, and a small spark of realization. Why would security guards arrive for someone like him? Her eyes drifted toward the door where he had disappeared. She remembered his calm voice, his kind eyes, the quiet way he had spoken to her when no one else cared. The guard turned back toward the manager again. Did he speak with anyone while he was here? He asked. The manager hesitated for a moment. Then his eyes slowly shifted toward Lena. Well, he talked to one of the waitresses, he said. Immediately, the guard followed his gaze. Lena felt every eye in the diner suddenly turn toward her. Her heart started beating faster. The guard walked a few steps closer. Was it you? He asked gently. Lena nodded nervously. Yes, sir. What did he say to you? The guard asked. Lena hesitated. He just asked if I was okay, she said softly. The guard exchanged a quick look with the other men behind him. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then the tall guard sighed quietly and reached for the small radio on his jacket. His voice was serious now. He was here, he said into the radio, but he already left. The room grew even quieter. The guard lowered the radio and looked back toward the door. Then he said something that made the entire diner hold its breath. We need to find him immediately. The diner remained completely silent after the guard spoke into his radio. Every person in the room was now focused on the group of suited men standing near the entrance. The tall guard looked around the diner once more, as if hoping the construction worker might somehow still be there. But the dusty man who had quietly helped Lena was gone. The guard let out a small breath and lowered his radio. Then he turned his attention back to Lena. His expression softened slightly. Can you tell me exactly what he said to you? He asked calmly. Lena felt nervous under the attention of the entire room. Her hands rested tightly against the edge of the counter. He just asked if I was okay, she said softly. And that's all? The guard asked. Lena nodded slowly. Yes. The guard exchanged another glance with the men behind him. For a moment, they spoke quietly among themselves. Then the tall guard stepped forward again. You should know something, he said. The manager crossed his arms impatiently. About what? He asked. The guard looked directly at him. About the man who was sitting here earlier. A few customers leaned forward in their seats, curious. The guard continued speaking. That man is not just a construction worker. A wave of quiet murmurs spread across the diner. The manager frowned. What do you mean? He asked. The guard's voice remained calm and clear. He is the son of the founder of one of the largest construction companies in this region. For a moment, the words didn't seem real. The customers looked at each other in shock. One man whispered, You're kidding. Another woman covered her mouth in surprise. That dusty worker? Someone muttered. The guard nodded slightly. Yes. The manager's face slowly lost its color. You're saying, he began slowly, that he's rich? Very, the guard replied simply. The room buzzed with whispers now. Suddenly, the jokes people had made earlier didn't seem funny anymore. The man who had laughed about the construction worker playing hero quietly stared at his table. The woman who had mocked him avoided eye contact with everyone. Near the counter, Lena felt completely stunned. Her mind struggled to understand what she had just heard. That quiet man, the one who had sat alone in dusty clothes. He wasn't poor? The guard continued explaining. He sometimes works anonymously at his company's construction sites, he said. He does it to understand the lives of the workers, to see how people treat those they believe are powerless. The manager swallowed nervously. So, he was pretending? He asked. The guard shook his head. No, he was working, just like any other worker. The room fell quiet again. But today, the guard continued. Something caught his attention. His eyes slowly moved toward Lena. He noticed how someone in this diner was being treated. Lena felt her chest tighten. The guard's voice remained steady. He saw a young woman struggling while everyone else looked away. No one spoke. The manager shifted uncomfortably, and he didn't like what he saw. Those words made the manager's face turn pale. For the first time since the guard arrived, he looked truly nervous. Lena lowered her eyes, feeling embarrassed by the attention. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Did I do something wrong?" The guard immediately shook his head. "No," he said gently. "Not at all." Lena looked up confused. "Then, why are you here?" she asked. The guard reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. "He asked us to return," he said. The room grew quiet again. "To give you this." He carefully placed a sealed envelope on the counter in front of Lena. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at it. "For me?" she asked softly. The guard nodded. "Yes." Lena hesitated before slowly picking up the envelope. Inside, she could feel something thicker than paper. She carefully opened it. The moment she looked inside, her eyes widened. There was money, more than she had ever held in her hands before. But that wasn't all. There was also a small card. Her fingers shook as she read the message written on it. The handwriting was simple and neat. It said, "No one should feel alone when they are hurting. Take care of your family, and never let cruel people make you believe you are small." Tears instantly filled Lena's eyes again. But these tears felt different from the ones earlier. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. Across the room, several customers suddenly began speaking as if they had always supported her. "I noticed she was having a hard day," one man said quickly. "Yeah, me too," another woman added. "Poor girl." But their words sounded hollow now. Everyone knew they had ignored her earlier. Behind the counter, the manager wiped sweat from his forehead. He forced an awkward laugh. "Well, that's very generous of him," he muttered. But his voice lacked confidence. He clearly understood that the situation had suddenly become very serious. The guard looked at Lena kindly. He wanted to help, he said. Lena held the envelope tightly against her chest. She couldn't believe what was happening. Just a few minutes ago, she had felt completely alone, humiliated, broken. And now, a stranger's kindness had completely changed her world. But the tall guard suddenly looked toward the door again. His expression became serious once more. "The problem," he said quietly, "is that he didn't want us to just deliver the envelope." Lena blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" The guard looked around the room slowly. His eyes stopped briefly on the nervous manager. "He plans to come back." A heavy silence filled the diner. The guard spoke one final sentence. "And when he does, there are some things he wants to address." The diner stayed quiet after the guard's last words. "He plans to come back." Those words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. No one spoke. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen had stopped. Customers sat stiffly in their seats, stealing nervous glances toward the door. The manager wiped his forehead again. His hands were slightly shaky now. Lena still held the envelope close to her chest. Her mind was racing. Was he really coming back? And if he did, what would happen? Then suddenly, the sound of engines echoed outside again. Low, powerful, the same deep rumble that had filled the parking lot earlier. Several people quickly turned their heads toward the windows. The 5 black SUVs were still parked outside. But now, one of their doors slowly opened. A man stepped out. Inside the diner, a wave of whispers spread again. "That's him. The construction worker." People leaned toward the glass, trying to see more clearly. The man walked calmly across the parking lot. His boots still carried dust from the construction site. His shirt was still simple and worn. He looked exactly the same as he had earlier. But now everyone saw him differently. The diner door opened with a soft chime. The construction worker stepped inside. At that moment, the entire room went completely silent. Every pair of eyes followed him. The guard standing near the entrance immediately stepped aside with quiet respect. The worker gave them a small nod and continued walking forward. His movements were calm and steady. There was no anger on his face. No pride, just quiet confidence. Lena felt her heart beating fast as he walked closer. For a moment, she didn't know where to look. She felt grateful, but also embarrassed by all the attention. The construction worker stopped near the center of the diner. His eyes slowly moved across the room. Many of the customers who had laughed earlier quickly looked away. No one wanted to meet his gaze. Finally, his attention turned toward the manager. The manager forced an awkward smile. "Well, welcome back," he said nervously. The construction worker studied him for a moment before speaking. His voice was calm. "I won't take much of your time," he said. The room remained silent. The worker continued. "I came back because I witnessed something here earlier." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The manager shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said quickly. The worker looked directly at him. "I saw a young woman doing her best to work while she was clearly hurting," he said. Lena felt her cheeks grow warm. Her eyes dropped to the floor. The worker continued calmly. "And I saw people around her pretend not to notice." A few customers lowered their heads. Some stared quietly at their plates. No one dared to speak. Then the worker looked back at the manager again. "And I saw how she was spoken to." The manager swallowed hard. "I was just doing my job," he said defensively. The worker nodded slowly. "I understand that running a business is difficult," he replied. His voice remained steady. "But there is something more important than running a business." The manager stayed silent. "Respect," the worker said. The word echoed softly through the diner. "Every person who walks into a place like this deserves to be treated with dignity," he continued. His eyes briefly moved toward Lena, especially the people who work the hardest. The room remained still. The worker folded his hands calmly. No one should be humiliated just because they made a mistake or because someone powerful is angry. Those words made Lena's chest tighten again. The memory of the afternoon still lingered. The worker's voice softened slightly. "I heard about the incident earlier today." The manager looked confused. "What incident?" he asked. The worker's expression didn't change. "The customer who spilled coffee on his suit and blamed her." The room stirred quietly. Several customers remembered the scene. The worker continued speaking. "Apparently that man believed his expensive jacket mattered more than another person's dignity." His words were calm, but they carried quiet strength. "And from what I was told, he threatened to have her fired." The manager looked down, unable to respond. The construction worker paused for a moment. Then he spoke again. "You see, money can buy many things." His eyes moved slowly across the room. "But it cannot buy kindness." Silence filled the diner. "And it certainly cannot buy respect." Lena felt tears slowly forming in her eyes again. But this time they were different. She wasn't crying because she felt small. She was crying because someone had finally stood up for her. The worker turned toward her gently. "I hope the help I left will make things a little easier for you and your family," he said. Lena nodded, unable to speak. Her voice felt trapped behind the emotions in her chest. Then the worker looked around the diner one last time. His voice was calm but firm. "Remember something?" he said. "Kindness should not depend on someone's wealth, their job, or the clothes they wear." Several customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The worker gave a small nod to the guards. Then he turned and began walking back toward the door. But just before leaving, he stopped. Without turning around, he spoke one final sentence. "And if that businessman ever returns to this place." The room held its breath. "I would suggest he learns the same lesson." For several seconds after the construction worker finished speaking, no one in the diner moved. The door slowly closed behind him with a soft sound. Outside, the evening air carried the quiet rumble of the waiting SUVs. Inside, the room felt completely different from before. Earlier, it had been loud and impatient. People had shouted for food and laughed without care. But now, a heavy silence filled the space. Many customers stared down at their plates, lost in thought. Some remembered how they had watched Lena crying earlier and done nothing. One man slowly shook his head. "I should have said something," he murmured quietly to himself. Another woman looked toward Lena with a soft, guilty expression. The mood of the entire diner had changed. Near the counter, Lena still stood holding the envelope tightly. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked down at the money and the small card again. It didn't just feel like financial help. It felt like someone had seen her pain and cared. For months, she had been struggling alone. Her mother's medical bills kept growing. Her younger brother needed books and school supplies. Every day felt like a battle she had to fight by herself. But now, things suddenly felt different. The guard who had given her the envelope stepped forward again. "There's something else," he said kindly. Lena looked up. "The support you received isn't just a gift," he explained. "Our company also has a program that helps families in situations like yours." Lena blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. The guard smiled slightly. "Your mother's treatment will be taken care of," he said. "And if you wish, there is also an opportunity for education or a better job within the company." For a moment, Lena couldn't even breathe. Her eyes filled with tears again. But this time they were tears of hope. Across the room, the manager stood quietly, clearly humbled by everything that had happened. He looked toward Lena with an awkward expression. "I didn't realize things were so difficult for you," he muttered. Lena didn't answer, not because she was angry, but because her heart was already somewhere else. Outside the window, the SUVs slowly began to move. The construction worker was leaving again, just as quietly as he had arrived. He hadn't stayed for praise. He hadn't waited for applause. He simply helped and walked away. Lena stepped closer to the window. For a brief moment, she saw the man through the dark glass of one of the vehicles. He looked calm, peaceful, as if helping someone had been the most normal thing in the world. The SUVs drove away down the road, their headlights fading into the evening traffic. Lena watched until they disappeared. Then she turned back toward the diner. For the first time that day, she smiled. A real smile. Not forced, not hidden behind tears. Just a quiet, grateful smile. Because sometimes the people the world overlooks are the very ones who see others the most clearly.